In this video, I made dead rails in only 1 hour. Here's how I did it. The first thing I needed was a train. Now I remember Roblox had a template with a working train model. It's not in Studio anymore, but with some clever sleuthing I managed to find the model on a forum post and added it to my game. For those of you who don't know, Dead Rails is a really popular game on Roblox right now where you drive a train and fend off enemy NPCs with weapons. You collect resources to fuel your train or sell and acquire better weapons. The goal is to get to the end of the map without dying, fight a bunch of NPCs, and escape. I tested the train to make sure it still worked because I know things can break after a few years, and this game would be pretty boring if the train couldn't move. Luckily it worked, so I could move on. Next, I added a script where it would keep track of how much money and wins a player has. I then created a GUI to display how much money a player has. I made it look nice and made sure it worked inside the game. As I mentioned before, in Dead Rails, there are enemy NPCs who will try to fight you, so I figured my version should have some as well. I found a zombie NPC in the toolbox that worked pretty well, so I decided to use that. But right now, I had no way of defending myself against the zombies, so the next thing I had to add was a weapon that players could use to fight back. So I made a stick players could whack zombies with. I gave it a nice animation and made a script that would deal damage to the zombies. Now players can fight zombies. And I thought it would be pretty cool if the NPCs got knocked back every time they were hit. Whoops, let me turn that down a little bit. Okay, now it's looking a little more realistic. Besides a weapon, players need a backpack to hold stuff in. So I found kind of an old Western style bag that would serve as their inventory. Then I made a GUI that would display the player's inventory. I created it as one big frame with a title and a scrolling frame in the center that would display the items that the player has. I added a templates folder which would hold the images of the items a player could have. The images I just pulled from the internet. Lastly, I added a button that they could use to toggle the inventory GUI on or off. If you want to learn how to make games like this, check out my course on Udemy. Sorry, I had to do it, but more on that later. The next part involved making the inventory system actually work. I updated my server script which handled the wins and the money to have an inventory folder which would basically hold all the items a player has. I added a remote event which would basically update the inventory GUI I created earlier to show any new items. Then on the client side, I added another script so that when the player gets a new item, the GUI would clone one of the image templates I created earlier and place it inside the middle frame for the player to see. Next up, I needed to determine which items can be picked up by a player. I decided to keep things simple. Players would be able to pick up coal, gold bars, and zombies, all of which can be sold for money or used as fuel for the train. I found the coal and gold bar models I want to use from the toolbox. Basically, for players to pick up items to add into their inventory, they would need to get close enough to it, triggering a prompt I added and pressing E. I placed the script into each item which would basically add the item into the player's inventory and then delete the object in front of them, creating the illusion that they picked the item up. I even made it work for the zombies, but I had to make sure that players destroy the zombies before they could pick up the body, otherwise zombies wouldn't pose much of a threat. So I tested it out. I tried picking up some gold bars and some coal. I fought a zombie and picked up the body, and luckily for me it worked and the items showed up in my inventory when I opened it. Then I had to figure out how to get the train to stop when it ran out of fuel, because right now it goes as long as the player is driving it, which is neither fun nor realistic. With some tinkering, I realized the train was controlled by this vehicle seat object called Drive. It had some really useful properties that I figured I could use. When I tested the train and played around with the properties, I realized that if I lowered the torque, which I realized meant the turning force of the wheels, the train would slow down, or speed up if I increased it. So I added a script which would slowly deplete the torque of the train as it kept moving, simulating the train using up all its fuel. Now I needed a way for players to be able to add fuel for the train to keep moving. To do this, I placed a prompt which would open up a GUI menu where the players can select what items they want to use for fuel. The GUI is almost exactly the same as the inventory GUI I created earlier, except with a different title and a close button that I added. I also customized the template images so that they were clickable buttons and displayed the amount of fuel the players would get. I connected all the buttons so that when they are pressed, it fires a remote event telling the server that they want to use the item as fuel. And on the server side, I made sure it added more torque to the train so it would keep moving, and deleted the item from the player's inventory. I ran the game again, and using the items I collected as fuel, it properly increases the amount of torque the train has, essentially adding more fuel to the train. Next, I added a part which would serve as the sell area for items that the players have collected. I put in a prompt which players could use to open the shop. For the shop GUI, I copied the fuel GUI that I used earlier and modified the server and client code so that it gives the player money instead of fuel. Since there weren't that many changes, I finished that pretty quickly. After that, I figured that players needed to be able to spend the money that they've earned. In Dead Rails, you can buy ammo, guns, bandages, and a bunch of other items. But since I only had 1 hour, I stuck to the most important items, which were the gun and the bandages. So I found a nice pistol which kind of looked like an old revolver which fits the whole Western theme, so I used that as the gun that players could buy. For the bandage, I found a nice free model which already had the functionality of a bandage built into it, so that saved a bit of time. I added a prompt into each item and coded it so that it would give the player the item, and remove the cost of the item from the money that they have. I tested it out and made sure that the purchasing and equipping of the items were functioning properly. The bandages healed me and the guns could damage the NPCs, so they worked perfectly. Now that most of the scripting was out of the way, I could move on to building. For the starter area, I decided to have a boarding platform like they have in all train stations, so I put one down beside the tracks. I then found a nice Western style general store in a gunsmith building, and placed it on the other side of the tracks. I mean, this might be the exact same general store because it looks really similar to the one in the actual game. Inside the general store, I placed the bandage and the gun models where players could buy them. I then moved the sell location inside the other building. I decided to make the map just one long stretch of railroad track because I didn't have much time. So I duplicated the baseplate parts, made them sand colored, and duplicated the tracks until I thought the map was long enough. Along the route, I added some camps and buildings guarded by zombies, and near each structure I planted some coal or gold bars for the players to try to get. At the end of the map, I placed a bridge, which I blocked with an invisible part, which would serve as the escape path. I added a prompt to the bridge and coded the bridge so that when the player tries to escape, it would spawn a bunch of zombies that they needed to destroy. Lastly, I worked on the GUIs. I threw in a day and night cycle just to be more consistent with the game. I then added a GUI which would display the current time, the distance traveled, and the fuel left. I tried to make all the GUIs kind of a yellowish brown color to match the Western theme of the game. And finally, I added a small display which would either show a "you win" message if you destroy all the zombies at the end, or a "you lose" message if you die. And then I connected them to the remote events which would fire upon each of these things happening. So that's my version of Dead Rails made in 1 hour. Now let's play the game. Alright, I'm going to collect some resources here, a bit of coal and some gold. Now let's sell it for some cash. I'm going to keep some of the items so I can use them for fuel. I'm then going to go buy a gun and a bandage. Now that we're armed and prepared, I'm getting on the train and moving. As you can see, the time is being updated, the distance traveled is increasing, and the fuel is going down. I'm going to stop by this camp and steal some coal and fight off some zombies. I can collect the zombies and use them as fuel later. I'm going to refuel the train and then keep going. I can see some gold bars by this building, so I'm going to go try and take some gold and then run away. Okay, now that we've gone to the end, I'm going to try to escape. And okay, we've spawned a bunch of zombies, but it's nothing I can't handle. Okay, and after I destroyed that last zombie, the game finishes, and it tells me that I've won. So that's Dead Rails done in 1 hour. If you want to learn how to make games like this, check out my course on Udemy. I go through the absolute basics of Roblox scripting and development, complete with quizzes and notes to help reinforce your understanding. It's great, it gets updated, and it's currently on sale. So check it out, link it in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.